A long time ago the gods charged Hercules with slaying the Hydra, which, like the banking lobby today, had many heads. Here is the head of the British Bankers Association, Angela Knight, she who so deftly fields the questions of the Treasury Select Committee. This is the Lord Minors, multimillionaire Secretary to the Treasury, City Minister and former Director of NatWest Bank. Yes, he who orchestrated the bailout of the British banks. And here Sir David Walker, another knight in banking armour, former Director of the Bank of England, Morgan Stanley and Lloyd's TSB, and also a former Assistant Secretary to the Treasury, appointed to head the government inquiry into the corporate governance of banks. Predictably, another damp squib. Bankers dominate the high offices of state around Whitehall, just as in America, where the recent Treasury Secretaries all graduated from the University of Goldman Sachs, Rubin, Paulson and Geithner. The banking lobby enjoys unlimited resources, literally unlimited, to sponsor such public figures to protect their interests. Here's a few more, but does it really matter?
Politicians maintain that jobs depend on the city, especially theirs.
We salute the men who served their country first, and then went on to serve the banks. Nigel Lawson, Chancellor, Non-Executive Director of N.M. Rothschild. John Major, Chancellor and Prime Minister, Chairman, Carlyle Group Europe, and Advisor to Credit Suisse. Tony Blair, Prime Minister, now Senior Advisor to J.P. Morgan. Jonathan Powell, Chief of Staff to Tony Blair, now Managing Director, Morgan Stanley Investment Division. They shall not grow poor, as we who are left grow poor. At the going down of the banks, and in recession, we will remember them.
Yes, it certainly does matter. But these people extract our money with such subtlety that we seldom make the connection. And we pay for it dearly in so many ways. Let's look at inflation. It's everywhere and all the time. And it's a lot higher than the official numbers suggest. But first, let's put it in context, because it wasn't always like this. No wonder Sir Percy is taken aback, flash-forwarded to this news vendor stand in London. Back in 1750, his newspaper cost 1 old penny. Even in 1949, a Sunday paper cost us only the equivalent of 1 decimal penny. Last weekend it would cost you between £1 and £2. That's a week's wages for Sir Percy's coachman. But the real shocker is that over the 2 centuries, 1750 to 1950, prices rose by only 3 times. All the rest has come from the incestuous growth of post-war banking. Most recently it's been down to the housing boom, again directly down to our banking system. So let's take a look at how we buy our houses, because mortgages are at the heart of the banking scandal. Prior to 1986, that's the green area on the left, UK building societies, in America known as savings and loans, provided virtually all residential mortgages. These were funded 100% by their saver members. In 1986, the government deregulated the status of building societies, and the majority progressively turned themselves into banks, returning billions of pounds to their members. They didn't need real money any longer because as banks they could create their own credit. 10 years later, the banking regulations were eased further, ostensibly to encourage competition, and the few remaining societies became free to borrow cheap credit in the money markets. By 2006, the banks had overwhelmed the mutuals and cornered 73% of the UK mortgage market. Mark you, they'd been trying for a long time. Remember the ruthless Mr. Potter in It's a Wonderful Life? By hook or by crook, he was determined to destroy the local building and loans mutual. Being a 1946 movie, our hero James Stewart had a guardian angel to put matters right at the end. Alas, not so for the Northern Rocks, the Bradford and Bingleys, and the American thrift supported by Freddie Mac or Fannie Mae.
Borrow money. What does that get us? A discontented, lazy rabble instead of a thrifty working class. And all because a few starry-eyed dreamers like Peter Bailey stir 'em up and fill their head with a lot of impossible ideas. Now, I say...
Just a minute. Now, hold on, Mr. Potter. Just a minute. Now, you're right when you say my father was no businessman. I know that. Why he ever started this cheap penny-ante building alone, I'll never know. But neither you nor anybody else can say anything against his character, because his whole life was... Why, in the 25 years since he and Uncle Billy started this thing, he never once thought of himself. Isn't that right, Uncle Billy? He didn't save enough money to send Harry to school, let alone me. But he did help a few people get out of your slums, Mr. Potter. And what's wrong with that? Right. Here, you're all businessmen here. Doesn't it make them better citizens? Doesn't it make them better customers? You said that what'd you say just a minute ago? They had to wait and save their money before they even thought of a decent home? Wait for what? Until their children grow up and leave them? Until they're so old and broken down that do you know how long it takes a working man to save $5,000? Just remember this, Mr. Potter, that this rabble you're talking about, they do most of the working and paying and living and dying in this community. Well, is it too much to have them work and pay and live and die in a couple of decent rooms and a bath? Anyway, my father didn't think so. People were human beings to him, but to you, a warped, frustrated old man, they're cattle. Well, in my book, he died a much richer man than you'll ever be.
I'm not interested in your book. I'm talking about the building and loan.
I know very well what you're talking about. You're talking about something you can't get your fingers on, and it's galling you. That's what you're talking about, I know. Well, I've said too much. You're the board here. You do what you want with this thing. There's just one thing more, though. This town needs this measly one-horse institution, if only to have some place where people can come without crawling to Potter. Come on.
So, was it just coincidence that house price inflation took off more or less matching these dates and events? Although prices in the US only trebled between '86 and 2006, in the UK they rose 5 times. You don't need to be a mathematician to read this graph and make the connection. These old-style mutuals and thrifts didn't conjure up loans from thin air. Every pound or dollar lent came from another member's savings. Furthermore, being owned by the members, the management was accountable to them, and the law restricted their business to mortgages. There were no fancy money market deals, and the societies were genuinely as safe as houses. Our homes are not gambling chips for financial opportunists. Let's repeal the 86 and 96 Acts, put the finance genie back in the bottle, and oblige the few remaining building societies to revert to their former status. It was quite clearly a bad mistake to listen to the get-rich-quick carpetbaggers from the city. What has been done can be undone. It would be a simple program which in itself would restore rational and understandable finance. Everyone had good reason to trust building societies, whereas none of us like banks, and we trust them even less. Now, I think this is the most revealing graph on inflation there is. Official statistics over the last 30 years show that each year the volume of credit has grown approximately 7% faster than the growth of GDP. That's the term used to measure production and incomes. The modest wee brown line is the real rate of growth of GDP in the United Kingdom, averaging less than 3% a year. The black line is the 10% growth of bank credit, year upon year. It sticks out a mile that bank credit is a short-term, profit-motivated business, which has no regard for the basic and most obvious rule of inflation. 30 years of rampant inflation has made a mockery of saving, be it for investment, a pension, a house, or your daughter's wedding. It generates discontent with wages and salaries because they're always reviewed retrospectively. And tell me about the time and effort that goes into forever adjusting prices. In short, inflation is thoroughly bad for all of us, except the present banking system, of course, which could not function without it. For far too long, banks have made inflation a profitable business. Think about it. Banks guarantee credit and earn profit from the interest. It matters not a jot to a bank if years later the debt is settled with a payment devalued by inflation. It was never real money in the first place. When people ask where does all the money come from to stoke up this inflation, the answer is simple. piling more and more bank credit money into the pot called the national money supply, and producing no matching real wealth or social benefit. Money in the economy is like water in a pot of good homemade soup. A certain amount is necessary for the ingredients to interact, but when it's consistently watered down, its value is corrupted. The cost of banking and its profits and bonuses are simply drawn from the community money supply. Permitting banks to act in this way is the root of the problem. These profits are the proceeds of legalized counterfeiting. No rational monetary system can operate on this basis without widespread economic and social distortion. It may appear that this point is being overstressed, but it's a key issue. Bank credit is debt money, and these debts chain us to all our yesterdays. Yet there's no long-term strategy on the part of any Western government to readjust the system. Unchecked, it is a mathematical certainty that the mountains of debt will grow ever greater, and that real environmental, economic and social progress will continue to be stifled by this universal fraud, which benefits no one but the promoters. We are now well into a world where, because of this debt, we can no longer afford to do many of the things we need to do, and yet are perfectly capable of doing. Any economic system which accepts high unemployment as inevitable is a failure. The powerful banking lobby must not torpedo this reform again, just because politicians think it's too awkward to amend the Banking Acts. It's as straightforward as was their repeal. There are many economists, academics and reformers with equally prestigious credentials who, like the rest of us, are kept out in the cold, yet remain determined to penetrate the inner temple of the establishment. Threats of disruption and going elsewhere would be meaningless in the face of extensive public opinion demanding a fair banking service, and there are many who would be only too glad of the opportunity to provide it. You'll hear how it can be done in Part 3.